It has been called the Jewel of the Sawtooths, an Idaho institution, and has been a gathering place for families and outdoor enthusiasts for more than 75 years. But when Idaho explorer Robert Limbert stood on the sandy shores of Redfish Lake and looked south onto the snow-covered peaks of the Sawtooth Mountains, all he had was a dream. A dream that someday a lodge, his Redfish Lodge, would grace this shoreline for the thousands of tourists that he inspired to visit Idaho. But few know the incredible hardships Limbert endured to complete his lodge, stresses that may have contributed to his early death. New research now takes us through the storied history of Redfish Lodge and Limbert's joys and struggles to construct a refuge in the Idaho wilderness.
There was three cabins that were double cabins, and each one had a fireplace. And then there was a real nice fireplace in the hotel, and that's where people would go and in the evening, and everybody would chat, and just a friend place.
In the gloaming by the fireside, with you I'll be content. In the gloaming by the fireside, every hour will be well spent.
May 23rd, 1928. Mr. J. L. Kraft Cheese Company, Chicago, Illinois. Dear Sir, when I was talking to you in Chicago, I told you I would send you data completely covering my proposed operations at Redfish Lake, Idaho. In this letter, I'm considering every angle and possibility of the place in detail so that you may see and know for yourself and Mr. McGowan what tremendous possibilities are in store for this region.
It was June of 1924. All of Robert Limbert's hard work and perseverance had finally paid off. National Geographic magazine had finally published the story of his 17-day expedition across Idaho's unmapped lava flows 3.5 years after he submitted his article. It was difficult for officials in Washington, D.C. to believe that such unique volcanic features could be discovered some 30 years after statehood. But Limbert's photographs and writings had turned them into believers. And now President Calvin Coolidge was about to sign into law Idaho's first national monument, Craters of the Moon. When the national spotlight shone on this Boise taxidermist, it became clear to everyone that this was no ordinary man, but a very talented individual. Aside from being a photographer and writer, he was also an artist, poet, explorer, hunter, conservationist, and an excellent marksman. He could imitate the calls of some 110 animals and birds. He was a gifted storyteller, but most of all, he had an infectious personality. In 1926, he became the obvious choice of a traveling spokesman for the newly formed Isaac Walton League Conservation Organization. For 7 months out of the year and several times a week, Limbert would share his Idaho adventures, nature photography, and trick shooting to crowds around the country.
As you know, I hold at the present time the world's championship with revolvers for exhibition shooting. Considered in a business way, I do not flatter myself that this means anything. But considered as a means of publicity to boost and interest people in a proposition like Redfish Lodge, it is invaluable.
I know I was really impressed because I was of the age where I had my own gun and did a little hunting, but I had never seen anyone before that was able to draw his gun and shoot an object in the air. I had heard about it, and of course I had read Westerns and had seen a few Western movies, and always kind of doubted that anybody could draw that fast. But after I saw him, then I was really impressed of the ability that some of the old gunslingers must have had.
It was Limbert's love of the outdoors, his hunting and fishing, that first brought him to the majestic peaks and mountain lakes of Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains. but it was through his enjoyment of sharing his experiences that he created Sawtooth Tours and began leading horseback trips into the area.
First, I will consider the region itself. The average elevation of the Sawtooth Range is roughly 500 feet higher than the highest peak in Glacier National Park. Redfish Lake is the largest of the lakes in the region. It being 6 miles long and a little over a mile wide, is also the most beautiful from a scenic standpoint.
It became his dream to build a guest lodge along the shores of Redfish Lake to accommodate those that he inspired to visit Idaho. After years of hard work, economic disappointments, and successes, Limbert finally completed construction of his masterpiece, Redfish Lodge.
I think the most important thing was the campfires. That stands out mostly in my mind. And another thing that stands out is people playing their harmonicas and then their accordions and my dad whistling and everybody singing. But, you know, we weren't fancy singers. Everybody could just having a good time.
Limbert's years of dreaming and planning became a reality, and he set in motion a cycle that has allowed generations of families the opportunity of holding communion with nature, which continues to this day more than 80 years after his death.
It was just always the beginning and the end of every trip. It was always the place that we came back to, that we were coming home to each time. And there was a real warmth to that. And probably our family reunion there was special because all of our children and then their spouses were able to take part in visiting the lodge and seeing the surroundings that we were so fond of.
If I do say it myself, I think there's nobody in the West more competent to handle, plan, and provide for this line of business than myself. You should arrange, if possible, to come out and see this country firsthand for yourself. I will show you a whale of a time. I'm very sincerely yours, Robert W. Limbert.
Although Robert Limbert has made the single largest contribution to the area, he was not the first person to recognize the unique qualities of Redfish Lake. The lake is the largest in the Sawtooth Wilderness. Its high mountain waters stretch some 5 miles long and almost a mile wide. Looking south, 10,000-foot Mount Hayburn and the 9,700-foot Grand Mogul define the end of the lake. Its crystal clear water is fed by Redfish Lake Creek from the south and from Fishhook Creek on its northwest side, both of which bring water down from the high mountain snowfields. Eventually, the lake flows north into nearby Little Redfish Lake and finally into the Salmon River. Redfish is the largest in a series of lakes where sockeye salmon make a 900-mile journey up the Columbia, Snake, and Salmon rivers to spawn in mountain lakes. During their journey, the salmon acquire a bright red color as they near their spawning destinations, giving the Redfish Lakes their name.
The most important event that I remember was that one day Dad came into the lodge and said, "Everybody come. We must go over to the Redfish Lake Creek, which is the outlet, and you must come see." And so we all went over there. Everyone stopped working. And it was late summer, early fall, and the redfish were coming back to spawn, and they were coming back up the creek. And there were thousands. It was redfish from bank to bank and as far back as you could see. It was solid redfish. And they were so bright red, and I had not, as a child, ever seen fish that color like that.
10,000 years ago, Native Americans used a rock overhang for shelter when they fished at the lake and hunted for animals along its banks. The images they drew of those animals can still be seen today. Throughout the 1800s, bands of the Shoshone Indians, locally known as the Tukudika, or sheep eaters because they hunted mountain sheep, spent summers in the Great Stanley Basin, enjoying the rich hunting and fishing along the lake. Although fur trappers such as Alexander Ross explored the Salmon River Valley in the 1800s, there are no records that they spent any time at Redfish Lake. But in 1862, when gold was discovered in Idaho, eager miners propelled by greed eventually explored every stream, river, and lake in search of gold and silver deposits. Although the miners never found any precious metals at Redfish Lake, they did use it as a retreat from their work and fished for trout and salmon from its clear waters. After the mine production declined, homesteaders and ranchers moved into the Stanley Basin, and by 1907, some 364,000 sheep were grazing in the Salmon River Valley. To prevent overgrazing and as an attempt to protect the scenic area, the federal government created the Sawtooth Forest Reserve in 1905, which was renamed the Sawtooth National Forest in 1907. In 1908, William and Leila Woolley attempted homesteading at the north end of Redfish Lake. The two built a number of small buildings, including a cabin, chicken coop, and a barn. But William found farming difficult, and Leila disliked the constant sound of the lapping waves along the lake shore. Eventually, the couple moved. Years later, in the summer of 1917, a German immigrant by the name of Bernard Horstmann entered the valley and registered a homestead on 160 acres of land east of Redfish Lake. Horstmann worked the land for a number of years and was able to pay off his outstanding debts. But while the pastoral land in the Stanley Basin is very beautiful, the short growing season and harsh winters make life difficult and precarious. In 1922, Horstmann petitioned and received a permit from the Forest Service for a boat rental and a hotel business on the shores of Redfish for the growing number of tourists.
Mr. Horstmann, he was a German immigrant, I guess, and spoke very brokenly, but was very pleasant. He was an old pioneer, nothing. He wasn't handsome or anything like that.
It doesn't take much imagination to understand why a 64-year-old man would trade the harsh life of a rancher to rent boats at a peaceful lake 4 months out of the year.
When you'd go camping in about 1921, 22, that was part of your recreation. And how we happened to go to Redfish Lake, possibly because that was the only place there were any accommodations in the way of groceries, things like that. We were camping, but you could buy groceries at that little old store there.
By the mid-1920s, Horstmann had renovated a small cabin and named it the Lake Hotel as a way to expand his boat rental business. Having acquired his fame for discovering and promoting Idaho's Craters of the Moon National Monument, Limbert began guiding tourists on pack trips in the Sawtooth Mountains and Craters of the Moon. Although Limbert guided a number of groups into the lava fields and continued to make new discoveries, most of his clients preferred the scenery of the high mountain lakes of the Sawtooth Mountains. Independently, Limbert had traveled to almost all of the national parks by this time and was impressed with the sheer economics of tourism that the railroads and the automobile had brought about. Limbert understood that Idaho's financial future resided in its greatest asset, her scenery. In 1926, he gathered a group of local investors and formed Sawtooth Tours Incorporated. The group had ambitious goals. They wanted to build at least 2 hotels and 40 cabins in the Sawtooth Mountains to capitalize on Idaho tourism, and the venture would ride on the coattails of Limbert's fame and publicity.
Mr. R.F. Warren, Governor, Sierra Madres Club, Los Angeles. During the past 2 years, I've been making a saddle and pack horse survey of Idaho's mountain districts, especially in the Sawtooth Mountains, with the idea of developing a summer tourist business. In this, I consider I have been remarkably successful.
Over those 2 years, Limbert recorded his travels in hundreds of photographs and hours of motion picture film, including notations on the habitats of deer and elk and of salmon and trout.
Robert W. Limbert is back from an invasion of the East in the interest of this unexplored empire, during which he and his associates were successful in getting 17 stories run in 11 great national magazines, and arranging to have their motion picture films of the Sawtooth Mountains displayed at 31 of the leading clubs of the East and Middle West. These films, in their rough, crude state, were shown by Mr. Limbert to company at the Hotel Hiawatha Monday evening, a company that sat spellbound with the wonder and delight at the marvelous panorama. Haley News Minor, 1926.
Throughout his travels in cities like Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, Limbert took dozens of reservations for his Sawtooth pack trips the following summer. With this new influx of tourists, Limbert realized that he needed a home base for his operations. The time and effort of getting his guests, horses, and equipment to the trailhead was just too difficult, and his guests could never relax and clean up after their scenic adventures. Limbert needed his own lodge.
He spent the whole summer in the saddle, kind of exploring and poking around the Sawtooths all the way from the Stanley area up to McCall. And basically he was checking out sites for where he wanted to build a lodge. He decided he wanted to do it around Stanley, and he checked numerous sites. I don't mean a half a dozen or so. He checked a lot of different places onto where he could build the lodge, and he realized that Dick Horseman had the premium site.
In November of 1927, Limbert signed a contract to lease the Lake Hotel from an aging Dick Horseman for $50 a year, with the understanding that Limbert could remodel and rebuild the structures as he saw fit. Limbert knew exactly what he wanted to build: a lodge and cabins based on dude ranches he studied in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. After Limbert obtained the lease to Horseman's Lake Hotel, Limbert broke away from his group of local investors and began contacting some of the businessmen he met while showing his Sawtooth films. Chicago's James Lewis Kraft, founder of Kraft Cheese, and Louis McGowan, a 36-year-old former Army captain and bond trader whom Limbert met while showing his Idaho films, expressed interest and wanted to know more.
May 23, 1928. Mr. J. L. Kraft, Kraft Cheese Company, Chicago, Illinois. Dear Sir, frankly, the place as it is now is not of much account. The building is crude and the bedrooms are small and cramped. It is not a place where I would even care to stop my camping parties at the present time, but it is the location, and at a reasonable expense can be put into proper shape. The enclosed photo will show you what it is today. Twice the Union Pacific has written me asking if they could give me representation, and I have been compelled to turn them down because I did not feel I had the proper accommodations. My idea is to build on a 50-foot room for a lobby, change the roof to run lengthways, and install 10 to 14 rooms upstairs. Outside, I want to put up at least 6 or 10 tent cabins, floored and boarded up on the sides, similar to those used in the tent camps at Yellowstone Park and other places. And then, using this as a nucleus, build it up to something worthwhile.
Limbert's 12-page business proposal was a success, and Limbert received the financial backing of McGowan. However, the extent of Kraft's financial support is unclear. That summer, Limbert, with the help of several carpenters, including a former miner by the name of George Blackman, Custer County's first African-American resident, began construction on Redfish Lodge. In July, he wrote to his Isaac Walton League friends back in Chicago to boast of the life he was enjoying at the lake and to give them an update on the lodge.
Honest now, I kind of feel sorry for you poor devils. Listen, trout last night for supper, cooked by an old hillbilly who sure knows his frying pans. I would have thought I was in the Blackhawk if I hadn't looked about and seen golden-barked trees instead of marbled columns, and heard the lap-lap of the waves from the lake against the shore instead of an orchestra. If I had not seen snow-capped towering mountain peaks and blue waters of my lake instead of hurrying, dusty, tired crowds. Oh, you poor devils. I feel sorry for you. As for me, I'm so busy I hardly know which things to do first. Got 2 crews of men logging and 3 carpenters working and 2 guys swinging a shovel. Hot diggity damn.
Limbert's vision for the lodge was a modest one, an addition to the original Lake Hotel, but it was a project that Limbert could afford to build. By midsummer, McGowan and Kraft, having seen photographs of the construction, felt otherwise. They envisioned a larger operation with more guests, a Chicago-sized project. Luckily, McGowan, whose father was a retired engineer and building contractor, drew up new plans which called for tearing down the old hotel and extending the lodge an additional 40 feet to the west. It was the correct decision, but one that required a lot more work, timber, and especially money.
Dear friend Mac, now about when you do come, bring your fishing tackle, your riding breeches, an old sweater, a pair of field glasses, a couple of pairs of old shoes to walk or ride in. Your regular fly fishing outfit you've been using will be all right, and a Kodak and plenty of film. See if you can't get Mr. Kraft to jar loose from dollar chasing and come along. It would add 10 years to his life. Oh yes, I wish you would send me the name of the fellow I met at the Hamilton Club who made, or rather invented, the Orange Crush drink. His brother-in-law has a summer place about 12 miles from here, and he says that all this fellow does is rave about the pictures and talk I gave him that day.
Kraft did not make the trip to Idaho that summer of 1928. But Limbert was able to share Idaho with his friends, some of the most prominent names in Chicago. By September, McGowan appeared happy with the progress Limbert was making from all of the progress reports and photographs. An excited McGowan figured that all of the log work could be finished within 1 month before the winter snows. It turned out to be an overly optimistic assessment.
As the timber was brought across the lake, of course they prepared it, and it was green timber. You got to realize these logs weighed 1,400, 1,500 pounds. They were 12 to 14 inches at the butt end, 8 or 9 inches at the tapered end, and they had to lift and roll these up on the previous one to keep going up on the walls. And they would take these heavy green logs and keep rolling them until they had a tight fit with the previous course. And he was so concerned about quality construction that he actually ran a plumb bob on the inside corners to get them square and vertical, which I don't think very many people did on their log structures. The quality of construction is just outstanding, just amazing what he did there.
For Limbert and Redfish Lodge, things could not have appeared any brighter. All of his planning and hard work was finally coming together. This winter's Isaac Walton League's lecture tour would be one of his finest. But perhaps Limbert became a bit too confident.
The other thing I knew about Limbert, and all of us did know because it was in the papers, that he was going back to Chicago to wipe out the gangs, because it was the days of Al Capone, as I recall. Oh yeah, everybody knew about Bob Limbert went to Chicago to wipe out Al Capone's gang.
Throughout the winter, dozens of people placed deposits with Limbert and his Sawtooth tours to experience Idaho. But in the spring, the mood changed dramatically. Suddenly, McGowan and Kraft were out of the picture. Limbert discovered that McGowan, the largest investor of the two, had lost all of his money speculating in the booming stock market in the spring of 1929.
June 16, 1929. Mr. E.C. Proctor, Chicago, Illinois. To put the place in running order, the hotel building must be completed and furnished. The stove, dishes, silverware, etc. are all on hand. Mr. Clifford Beagle, Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. And materials for 2 more. I guess you think I am the limit. Well, I own up to it. I am. The fact of the matter is, I've been nearly crazy for the past few weeks. The fellow I had in Chicago who was going in with me went broke on the stock market. And when I say broke, I mean broke. The Chicago man kept leading me to think he was going to come out all right until the last moment, and then he let me down. It sure has put me into one devil of a mess, and I never was so discouraged in my life. I've gone into debt, worked, schemed, slaved, and did everything I possibly could to put this thing over, and then right when I think I'm sitting on top of the world, I'm nowhere. I've had over 200 inquiries from people in the East who want to come out, and it simply has me crazy.
The summer of 1929 proved to be a difficult time. Although the second floor of the lodge was not completed, at least the kitchen and lobby was functional, and guests could stay in any of the 10 tent cabins. Limbert's wife Margaret and her friend Martina Yeiter cooked for the guests that summer, while Martina's husband Jack helped out with the construction.
Jack Yeiter helped my dad, and his wife's name was Martina, and she helped my mother, and frequently people would come in and eat. It wasn't very much of a practice, but it was just, you know how you do.
Despite his series of urgent appeals, including offers to build private cabins at Redfish Lake in exchange for money, nothing materialized. In desperation, Limbert panned for gold around the Sawtooths.
We camped at Redfish Lake, and we were the only ones there. I remember that. The other thing I remember is that there was a lodge at the north end of the lake, and I can't remember for sure whether it was completely completed, but I do remember there was a lodge. And as we left, Bob Limbert was at the lodge, and he asked if he could ride into Stanley with us. He evidently didn't have a car, or it didn't work, but we picked him up, and he was the sixth passenger in the car, and we went to Stanley, dropped him off, and went on to Yankee Fork.
Things only got worse. McGowan's creditors soon discovered his assets at Redfish Lodge. Ironically, it was Limbert's attention to detail in his progress reports to McGowan that sealed his fate.
That Louis E. McGowan, by Bob Limbert, his agent of the County of Blaine and State of Idaho, for and in consideration of $400 to be paid by J.G. Hedrick, the following property situated on the Redfish Lake: 10 tents, 10 beds, 10 heavy woolen blankets, 50 sheets, 16 single windows, roofing paper, 2 dozen knives and forks, 2 dozen tablespoons, 3 dozen drinking glasses, 40 plates, 15 glass salt and pepper shakers, and 20,000 feet of logs owned by the said McGowan and Limbert this 2nd day of October, 1929.
3 weeks later, on Thursday, October 24th, the stock market suffered its first one-day crash. The following Monday and Tuesday, it lost another 25%. It would be called the Great Crash of '29, and its aftermath would usher in the start of the Great Depression. For Limbert, things couldn't be worse. With the first snow beginning to fall, the lodge was still missing a second floor. Anything that wasn't nailed down had been sold off to pay creditors. Even the logs that he cut down to finish the second floor were no longer his own. With his savings depleted, he boarded a train for Casper, Wyoming, to begin his first show of the season for the Isaac Walton League. There was little he could do but ponder the fate of his dream as he traveled from city to city. It would be another 7 months before he could return to his Redfish Lodge. The crowds of people that came to see the famous Two-Gun Bob perform must have boosted his spirits and taken his mind off of his troubles. Despite the economic conditions, there were people that still wanted to escape to the mountains of Idaho, even if it was only through Limbert's stories and photographs. At some point that winter, Limbert determined to finish his lodge. He would use the proceeds from its performances, mortgaging his remaining assets, and with any profits from summer tours he might just have enough. When Limbert returned to Idaho in the spring of 1930, he loaded up the family and headed up to Redfish Lodge to begin work. Completing the lodge became a family affair. As a young girl, Limbert's daughter Margaret would help find stones for the fireplace chimneys that her dad was building.
We used to go out and pick up the stones and the rocks. I think I was looking at size, and at that time I thought they were beautiful. I don't know whether they look so good now or not, but that's years and years ago.
It was activity that was a lot more productive than her favorite pastime at the lake.
Then you didn't have bathrooms. You had outhouses, and for pleasure, or for the fun in it, we would lock them in. And sometimes it would be for a little while.
By the end of the summer, Redfish Lodge was finished. Limbert had completed his masterpiece, and he could now enjoy the fruits of his labor. But that would have to wait until the next summer, when Limbert completed his winter tour for the Isaac Walton League. Although the stock market crash had taken its toll on vacationing tourists from the East, Limbert still managed to keep the lodge running, but only through his performances around the country as advertisement.
See, my dad, at that particular time, would bring back what was referred to as the dudes. That would mean people who were wealthy from the East would come back to see the country. And he had what you'd call field trips, or everybody was on horseback. And then they'd go up to the lake, and then they'd have horses up there, and they'd go around the sawtooths. And it was just a place where what we called the dudes could see the outdoors and really love it like the rest of us.
After a day in the saddle touring the mountains, his guests would enjoy a home-cooked meal before Limbert would perform his trick shooting on the beach and then tell stories around the campfire. As the evening went on, the crowds around the campfire would grow.
People come over from the point, what we used to call the point, and you know how it goes, voices carry and stuff like that, and all of us singing. We were just having a good time.
Little did Limbert know that the summer of 1932 would be his last at Redfish Lake. While traveling back to Boise to be at the bedside of his dying mother, Limbert suffered a massive heart attack in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and died June 15, 1933. His mother died the following day.
When my dad died, you got to remember that we lost our home, and we had to move. We lost Redfish Lake, and we lost everything that represented money. It was difficult. That's all I can say. I never went to school, but a very short time after that, and there was a little old lady that was a teacher at Boise High School, and I got a job working at C.C. Anderson's store, but she used to let me come over and sit in her room on a Friday afternoon, and I got off work, and I could go and sit in her room for a couple hours, and it was the idea of I was going to school, but actually I never went to school. I just got to sit there, and she'd give me things to do.
I'm not sure things have been a whole lot different if he had lived, if he wouldn't have died so young because of the Depression in the United States. I think it created circumstances way beyond his control, and I'm not sure even Bob Limbert could have made a good go of it.
With George Crom acting manager, the summer of 1933 proceeded along, albeit without everyone's inspiration for coming. Gone were the sounds of laughter when Limbert would tell of his Idaho adventures. Gone were the sounds of his harmonica around the campfire. Gone were the sounds of the cry of a wolf he would perform before his guests retired for the night. Without Limbert's personal attraction, the wealthy Eastern tourists stopped coming and the lodge closed. A guidebook in 1937 noted, "The hotels and cabins on Big Redfish Lake have never been opened for reasons which seem quite mysterious, but boats can be rented and campsites are many." Since Limbert was only subleasing Redfish Lodge, sadly, all of his hard work reverted back to Horseman's estate. Horseman's heirs chose to keep the expensive lodge closed and to continue operating the boat rental business until the Forest Service lease expired in 1942. After World War II, Redfish Lodge was reopened and restored to its original grandeur, using the builder's own photographs. But Limbert's name had already been forgotten in the 13 years since his death. Over the years, the lodge has passed through a number of different owners, each making some changes to the original structures. But what has never changed was Limbert's original vision. A place where you can turn your back on the grinding roar of the civilized world and seek the quiet and peace of this primitive, untouched mountain country. A place where you can spend the day hiking into the wilderness, fishing from the nearby lakes and streams, or exploring the Sawtooth Mountains on horseback. And when the day ends, a lodge where you can gather to have a home-cooked meal and share your experiences around the fireplace. If those activities are still enjoyed, then all of his work was never in vain. Robert Limbert's name may have been forgotten, but his dream is still very much alive and shared by every visitor to Redfish Lake.
When the end comes and you sit around the campfire for the last time, you will think of it as the most wonderful experience you've ever had. So truly big and so thrilling that there can be but a few comparisons. It will be a trip you will want to take again and again.
In the gloaming by the fireside, with you I'll be content. In the gloaming by the fireside, every hour will be well spent. We'll see our hopes and dreams, dear, like pictures in the fire, finding in its gleam, dear, our heart's desire. In an armchair by the fireside, just big enough for two, we'll be happy, oh so happy.